Welcome back, guys. How's it going? Good. So we are back here on this podcast. Today's episode is going to be really good. Kind of talking more about how to measure the degree of our proactivity in a specific way, in measuring our time and efforts and energy. Really cool concept. But I am outside in the cold right now in Reno, Nevada, at my buddy's house, so really excited about that. There's a huge party going on inside. Well, not a huge party, but just like people inside talking and chattering. So I'm out here. So we have what we have. But we go into today. Our topic today is about the circle of concern and the circle of influence. So these are super big, like hot topics, and are very important in measuring like the degree of our proactivity and measuring how much we actually see ourselves as proactive individuals, right? And we're going to revisit the story of Stephen and Sandra Covey and their son and like changing their paradigms. And so essentially an excellent way to become self-aware is to look at where we focus our time and energy. So we have like all of these concerns that are kind of outside of our immediate control, right? Such as like the weather or like our children, what they think or feel. Problems at work, like the national debt, nuclear war, what the neighbors are doing, right? And just like, there's lots of like circle of concerns, like rumors, gossips, this kind of stuff like that. And so we also have, and so those are categorized in this circle of concern. So as we begin to look at the circle of concern, it essentially is telling us that like we don't have any real control over those things and we can't really do anything about it. So I hope that makes sense. It's like something that like you can't directly control. Like for example, I can choose to do this podcast. This is within my direct control. It's within my circle of influence. However, I can't control what people think of the podcast. That's my circle of concern, right? And so by determining where our focus is, if it's more focused in what people think, in what's out there, in external things, it's like very hard to be able to do this. For example, like on the doors and selling and pest control, if I'm so focused on like worried and concerned about what they think of me, then I'm not actually going to be able to like be effective. I'm not going to produce any quantum changes in my life. Whereas if I focus on the circle of influence and doing so that I can actually like control, then I will. So for example, if I'm worried about or concerned if they trust me or not, like that is a valid concern because people do need to trust me in order to buy, but I should be focusing on being trustworthy. So being a trustworthy person and communicating that message that I am trustworthy is a way to essentially work within my circle of influence. So proactive people work within their circle of influence and expand it out. So they work within themselves and creating that PC within themselves to be able to have more influence. And they expand that circle of influence, or like, so like the more like hardworking someone is, the more trustworthy someone is, the more integral someone is, the more people will listen to them and be influenced by that individual, right? I think of like a lot of the people who are like famous out there, they've worked within a circle of influence, which is why it has expanded such a big event. Whereas reactive people focus on the weaknesses of other people. They focus on the problems in the environment or like circumstances over which they don't have any real control. If that does, it leads to like blaming, accusation. It leads to like reactive language. Increased feelings of victimization, and so it's like very hard to get anything done if you're constantly blaming other factors, because that means that you're not going to take any action yourself and the problem is not going to get solved. And when that happens, you have a reactive focus, which is a negative energy, and it will actually decrease your circle of influence to the point where nobody will even like listen to you. For example, like a homeless guy, right? I'm not saying all homeless guys work or don't work within the circle of influence, and I'm going to be generalizing here, so I hope I don't like offend anybody. But if you're on the streets not doing anything to work within a circle of influence, not finding a job, or not working for someone, or not trying to improve yourself to like your PC to produce a P, your production capability to produce production, then you're literally reducing your circle of influence, and nobody is even like listening to you, or you're not making an impact on the world, right? So interesting stuff there. Whereas a focus on the circle of influence is very positive, it's enlarging, it's magnifying, it increases confidence, and it causes the circle of influence to increase. Now, revisiting the story of Sandra and Stephen Covey when they were viewing their son in terms of his weaknesses, so his awkwardness, his bad grades, right, his clumsiness, and viewing the situation in terms of how other people were treating him and viewing them, like bullying him and saying that he wasn't good at sports or whatever. Well, those things were in the circle of concern. So his weaknesses and how people treated him were in the circle of concern. They can't really control that, right? And so they weren't getting anywhere. They weren't accomplishing anything. And it wasn't until they finally decided to work within the circle of influence, to work on their own paradigms, their own feelings, right, that they actually made change. So when they focus on the circle of concern, they actually increase their own feelings of inadequacy as quote-unquote good parents, whatever that means, according to society, right? So again, bringing this back to the social mirror. It's like the social mirror of society reflects what a good parent is. And so if your children aren't matching up to that, that means you're a bad parent, right? And so that's the way that they're viewing it, but that's through this like social mirror, and it's also through the circle of concern. And so it increased our own feelings of inadequacy and helplessness because nothing was getting done. So they thought that they were just helpless. They couldn't do anything about it, which is a very reactive mindset to have. And then it also reinforced their own son's dependence. So he was being reaffirmed in the script that he's not good enough, that his parents don't trust him, that he isn't worth anything, right? And when they started working on the circle of influence on their own paradigms, and changing that to where they don't care what other people think. They're just going to view their son in this light of through like divine eyes or through Christ's eyes or like through this lens of like unconditional love, independent of how he is or what he does or who he is. They're just going to love him because he exists, right? And that made like all the difference in the world. And so as they stopped focusing on the conditions and started focusing on themselves, they were able to actually influence their conditions. Kind of a cool concept there. And I see that happening with like relationships as well. Like, for example, if I'm so focused on like the flaws of my spouse or her weaknesses, like nothing's actually going to change in that relationship. The relationship isn't going to be built. But if I start like shifting my focus from that to how I can appreciate her, how I can love her more, how I can sacrifice more for her, how I can make her breakfast or write her love notes. If I do that, then that relationship will improve and I'll receive more blessings of joy and satisfaction. That's kind of like a real life summary or thought on that. Now, this next part here is a weird philosophy that honestly I don't understand. So once I understand it, I'll get back to you on it. But essentially it's where, because of like position, wealth, a role, or relationships, the circle of influence becomes larger than your circle of concern. So typically your circle of concern is larger than your circle of influence, right? Where the things out there are like, there are a lot more things out there than there are things that you can control like yourself. And so there's this weird philosophy or circumstance to where the circle of influence is actually larger than the circle of concern. And Covey says that it reflects a self-inflicted emotional myopia, another reactive, selfish lifestyle focused in the circle of concern. Though they may have to prioritize the use of their influence, proactive people have a circle of concern that is at least as big as their circle of influence, accepting the responsibility to use their influence effectively. So essentially like proactive people will have a circle of concern that is at least as big as their circle of influence, not smaller, but it has to be at least as big. A real life application of that, I don't know. I actually don't know where this situation applies. And so when I learn that, I will get that back to you guys. But I've been pondering on this, and I've actually asked some friends, and like we can't figure it out. So we're gonna see what we can do about that. But that's the podcast for today, guys. I'm really excited to start focusing on working within my circle of influence. I feel like I have really been, I feel like I've really been empowering kind of the weaknesses of other people to control me. Instead of working within my circle of influence, I'm really excited to like get more down into my own paradigms, my own thought processes, my own actions, my own like making and keeping commitments. How can I show love for people independent of what their actions, and also like with unconditional love? That doesn't matter like what they do or like how they are. I still just love them unconditionally and focus within my own circle of influence. So I'm really excited for that. Thank you guys for hopping on this podcast, and love you. See you in the next episode.